A being of incomprehensible power tears through the warp and emerges on an Imperial world, effortlessly annihilating threats that would doom entire sectors with one punch. But this entity answers to no god, follows no doctrine, and cannot be explained by any Imperial teaching. The Inquisition faces an impossible choice. Worship One Punch Man as the Emperor's will, or destroy what might be the greatest heresy ever to walk among mankind. In a galaxy where even the mightiest warriors are insignificant before the horrors of the void, what happens when absolute power arrives in human form, and the Imperium realizes they cannot control, corrupt, or kill it? It began on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in Z City. Saitama pushed his shopping cart down the narrow aisle of the discount supermarket, his bald head reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights above. In his cart sat 3 eggs, a bag of bean sprouts, and a package of discounted meat that would expire tomorrow. He reached for a can of soup, when the entire building shook. The lights flickered. Somewhere in the distance, sirens began to wail. Saitama sighed. Another monster attack. He had hoped to finish his shopping before dealing with whatever new threat had decided to terrorize the city. The wall exploded inward, showering the aisle with concrete and rebar. Through the smoke stepped a creature that looked like it had been stitched together from nightmares. It had too many arms, too many eyes, and its skin rippled with colors that hurt to look at. Reality Ripper, the newscasters would later call it. A dragon-level threat that had somehow gained the power to tear holes in space itself. The creature laughed, a sound like breaking glass and screaming metal. Around its body, purple tears opened in the air, each one showing glimpses of other places, other worlds. Through one portal, Saitama could see a city made of crystal. Through another, an ocean of fire. Through a third, something moved in darkness. Something vast and hungry. Reality Ripper reached out with 6 arms and grabbed shoppers, pulling them toward the portals. Saitama set down the soup can. He walked toward the monster, his red gloves hanging loose at his sides, his yellow suit slightly wrinkled from being stuffed in his closet. The creature noticed him and grinned with 3 mouths. It opened a portal directly in front of Saitama, a swirling vortex of purple and black that seemed to pull at the very fabric of space. Saitama kept walking. He could feel the pull of the portal, like a strong wind, but he had faced stronger. Reality Ripper laughed again and dove through one of its own portals, trying to escape. Without thinking, Saitama jumped after it. His fist was already cocked back, ready to end this fight with one punch like he ended every fight. He felt the portal close around him like cold water, and then everything went wrong. The space between dimensions was not empty. It was full of screaming, full of colors that should not exist, full of things that watched with eyes made of hatred and hunger. Saitama tumbled through the void, and for the first time in years, he felt something close to surprise. This was not like the other portals he had punched through. This was deeper, stranger, more wrong. The warp, they would later call it in the galaxy he was falling toward, though Saitama had no name for the nightmare that surrounded him. Things reached for him with claws made of madness. Faces formed in the churning chaos, faces that laughed and wept and screamed all at once. Saitama punched one that got too close. It exploded into fragments of impossible geometry. He punched another, and another. Each punch tore holes in the screaming void, and through those holes he could see stars, real space. He focused on one of those holes and pushed himself toward it, his cape fluttering behind him in winds that blew from nowhere and everywhere at once. With a final effort, he broke through. Mordax's prime was dying. The hive world stretched across the planet's surface like a cancerous growth, billions of souls crammed into towers that scraped the polluted sky. And through those towers ran the green tide of the orcs, a wa of such size that the planetary defense forces had already written off 3 entire districts. In the lower hab blocks of District 7, Sergeant Mara Kellis pressed her back against the rockcrete wall and tried to count how many rounds she had left. 12. She had 12 last shots between her and the greenskins that were tearing through her squad like they were made of paper. The vox in her ear crackled with screams and prayers. Commissar Drex was shouting orders from somewhere, but the words were lost in the thunder of orc weapons and the roar of their war cries. They had held this choke point for 6 hours. Now, in the 7th hour, they were breaking. An orc twice the size of a man crashed through the barricade, its crude axe dripping with blood. Kellis fired her lasgun, until it clicked empty, and then she drew her knife, knowing it would not be enough. Knowing that she would die here, in this forgettable corridor of a forgettable hive on a forgettable world at the edge of Imperial space, the sky above the hive tore open. Not with a sound, but with a feeling, like the universe itself had taken a sharp breath. Through the tear fell a figure in yellow and white, tumbling end over end, trailing wisps of purple energy that hissed and dissolved in the toxic air. The figure hit the ground in the middle of the orc advance with the force of an orbital strike. The impact crater spread outward in a perfect circle, 30 meters wide, turning orcs into red mist and flipping over their ramshackle vehicles like toys. The shockwave rattled through the hive, shattering windows 3 kilometers away. In the sudden silence that followed, Saitama stood up from the center of the crater and brushed dust off his cape. He looked around at the burning buildings, the green-skinned creatures that were starting to recover from the shock, and the humans in strange uniforms who were staring at him with expressions he could not quite read. He raised one hand in an awkward wave. One of the orcs, a beast with a metal jaw and eyes full of rage, let out a roar that shook the air. It charged at Saitama, its weapon raised high. Behind it, hundreds more orcs took up the cry, a wave of green muscle and crude violence that had broken armies. Saitama looked at the charging orc. He looked at his fist. He sighed, because he already knew how this would end, and threw a punch. Not a strong punch, not even a serious punch. Just a normal punch, the kind he had thrown 10,000 times before, the kind that always ended the fight before it could begin. The orc's head exploded. So did its body. So did the orcs behind it. The shockwave from Saitama's fist continued outward, a visible wall of compressed air that stripped paint from walls and tore metal like paper. It caught the orc warboss at the center of the wall, a monster 3 times the height of a man, covered in scars and crude armor, wielding a power claw that could rip through a tank. The warboss had time to see the wall of force coming toward it, time to realize, in whatever passed for thought in its violent mind, that this was death. Then the shockwave hit. The warboss ceased to exist. Not died, not fell, but simply stopped being, along with everything in a cone-shaped area that extended for 2 kilometers behind it. Vehicles exploded. Buildings collapsed. Orcs were lifted into the air and smashed against walls with such force that they left green stains. When the dust settled, the entire orc wa was gone. Thousands of greenskins, wiped from existence in less than a second. In the sudden quiet, Sergeant Kellis realized she was still alive. She looked down at her hands, at the knife she was still holding, and then looked at the figure in yellow standing in the crater. Around her, the surviving members of the Planetary Defense Force were falling to their knees. Some were crying, others were praying, their voices joining in the familiar litany of thanks to the God Emperor of mankind. Commissar Drex stumbled forward, his uniform torn and bloody, his face pale with shock. He stared at Saitama for a long moment, and then he too dropped to his knees. His voice, when he spoke, was barely a whisper. "A living saint. The Emperor has sent us a living saint." The words spread through the Vox network like fire through dry grass. A living saint. A miracle. The Emperor's will made flesh. Within minutes, every surviving soldier in District 7 knew what had happened. Within an hour, the entire hive knew. Saitama, meanwhile, walked over to the nearest group of soldiers and cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said, his voice flat and tired. "I'm kind of lost. Could you tell me where the nearest grocery store is?" The Cathedral of the Eternal Vigil rose from the heart of Mordaxus Prime like a knife pointed at the heavens. Its spires reached 3 kilometers into the toxic sky, each one carved with the names of saints and martyrs who had died in service to the God Emperor. Inside its main hall, beneath stained glass windows that depicted ancient battles, Cardinal Matthias stood before his throne and tried to understand what he was looking at. Saitama sat on a marble bench, still in his yellow suit, looking around the cathedral with the same expression he might wear in a dentist's waiting room. Behind him stood Commissar Drex, his uniform cleaned but his eyes still wide with the shock of what he had witnessed. Around them, 200 clergy, officers, and nobles whispered among themselves, their voices echoing off the vaulted ceiling like the rustle of wings. Cardinal Matthias was a man who had spent 70 years studying the mysteries of faith. He had memorized every holy text, debated with heretics and philosophers, and witnessed miracles that would break lesser minds. But this being before him, this bald man in strange clothes who had erased an entire Orc with a single punch, challenged everything he thought he knew about the Emperor's power. The Cardinal cleared his throat, and the whispers died. "You claim you are not a saint," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "You claim you are not blessed by the Emperor. Yet you perform miracles that surpass the greatest heroes of our Imperium. How do you explain this?" Saitama scratched his head. "I just trained a lot," he said. "Push-ups, sit-ups, squats, and running. Every day for 3 years." The hall erupted in confused murmurs. Commissar Drex stepped forward, his hand resting on his bolt pistol. "Your Eminence, with respect, perhaps this is a test of faith. The Emperor often works in mysterious ways." "Or," said a new voice from the shadows, "perhaps this is something else entirely." The crowd parted as a figure emerged from the cathedral's side entrance. She wore armor the color of midnight, inscribed with wards and seals that seemed to drink in the light. Her face was hard and sharp, like something carved from stone, and in her eyes burned the absolute certainty of someone who had stared into the darkness and learned to stare back. Inquisitor Vex of the Ordo Hereticus had arrived. She walked to the center of the hall, her boots clicking on the marble floor, and studied Saitama with the intensity of a hunter examining tracks. "I am Inquisitor Cassandra Vex," she said. "And you, stranger, are either the greatest blessing the Imperium has received in 10,000 years, or the most dangerous threat we have ever faced." Saitama looked at her with mild interest. "I just want to go home," he said. "Do you know anything about dimensional portals?" Vex ignored the question. She turned to Cardinal Matthias. "Your Eminence, I am invoking my authority under the seal of the Inquisition. This being must be detained and studied until we can determine his nature and origin." The Cardinal's face darkened. "You would imprison a living saint?" "The people have seen what he can do. They believe he is sent by the Emperor himself." "Belief is not truth," Vex replied coldly. "And faith without verification is heresy waiting to happen." Before the Cardinal could respond, the doors of the cathedral burst open. A tech priest stumbled in, his red robes trailing cables and smoking sensors. Behind his brass mask, his voice emerged as a crackling mix of human speech and machine code. "Dominus Cray of the Adeptus Mechanicus," he announced himself, his mechadendrites waving in agitation. "I have conducted preliminary scans of the anomaly. The results are impossible." "Holy impossible." He approached Saitama, holding out a device covered in blinking lights and spinning gears. "Your power readings fluctuate beyond measurable parameters. When I attempted to scan your biological donor structure, 17 cogitators experienced catastrophic failure. 3 servitors suffered neural collapse. 1 Auspex unit simply ceased to function and began displaying what I can only describe as a crying face on its screen." Saitama shifted uncomfortably on the bench. "That sounds bad." "Sorry about your machines." Dominus Cray's mechanical eyes whirred and focused. "You do not understand. The energy signature you emit is similar to the warp, but cleaner, more focused. It is as if you contain a star within your physical form, but compressed to impossible density. By all laws of physics and biology, you should not exist." "Yeah," Saitama said with a shrug. "I get that a lot." Inquisitor Vex stepped between them. "Dominus, can you restrain him?" The tech priest's vocalizer emitted a burst of static that might have been laughter. "Restrain him? Inquisitor, I cannot even properly scan him. Every system I direct at this being either fails or produces results that violate fundamental constants of reality." Vex's hand moved to her plasma pistol. "Then we do this the old way." She drew her weapon in one smooth motion and aimed it at Saitama's head. Around the hall, 24 stormtroopers emerged from alcoves and side passages, their weapons trained on the figure in yellow. "You will come with me," Vex said. "You will submit to testing and interrogation. If you resist, I am authorized to use lethal force." Saitama looked at the guns, pointed at him. He looked at the Inquisitor's face, at the absolute conviction burning in her eyes. Then he stood up, slowly, his cape settling around his shoulders. Okay, he said. I guess I can answer some questions. The Commissar exhaled with relief. Cardinal Matthias began to protest, but Vex silenced him with a gesture. Take him to holding cell Epsilon 7, she ordered. Maximum restraints. No contact with the general population. As the stormtroopers moved to escort Saitama out, he paused and looked back at the Inquisitor. Is there food in this holding cell? He asked. I missed lunch. The holding cell was not designed for comfort. It was a cube of reinforced adamantium, 3 meters on each side, located in the deepest level of the hive's security complex. The walls were inscribed with wards against psychic influence. The door was sealed with 12 separate locking mechanisms. Inside, Saitama sat on the metal bench and waited. He had been waiting for 6 hours now. He was getting hungry. Above the cell, in the observation room, Inquisitor Vex watched through a one-way mirror while Dominus Cray manipulated controls covered in sacred oils and purity seals. Subject shows no signs of distress. The tech priest reported. Heart rate steady at 60 beats per minute. Respiration normal. No elevated cortisol levels despite prolonged isolation. Vex frowned. Increase the psychic dampening field. If he is drawing power from the warp, we need to cut off his connection. Cray's mechadendrites danced across. The controls. The air around the cell began to shimmer as invisible forces pressed down on the space within. Psychers who entered that field would feel their minds crushed, their connection to the Imperium severed. Saitama yawned. Still no reaction, Cray observed. Inquisitor, I do not believe he is connected to the warp at all. His power appears to be entirely self-contained. Before Vex could respond, alarms began to shriek throughout the complex. The main display screen flickered to life, showing multiple views of the hive's upper levels. In one screen, civilians were running through streets in panic. In another, PDF soldiers were setting up barricades. In a third, something moved in the shadows between buildings, something that left trails of smoke and the stink of corruption. Chaos, cult. Vex spat the words like poison. They must have been waiting for the right moment to strike. Commissar Drex's voice crackled through the vox. Inquisitor, they have summoned something. The astropaths are screaming. They say a daemon walks in District 3. Vex's face went pale. A daemon. An entity from the warp. A fragment of the dark gods made flesh, sustained by belief and hatred and the suffering of mortals. Even a lesser daemon could slaughter hundreds. A greater daemon could doom the entire hive. Seal all districts, she ordered. Deploy the Grey Knights if we have any in-system. Prepare for exterminatus protocols if containment fails. In the holding cell below, Saitama heard the alarms. He stood up and walked to the door, placing his hand against the cold metal. Hey, he called out. Something's happening, right? Do you need help? In the observation room, Vex stared at the screens. District 3 was burning. The daemon had manifested in the central plaza, and it was magnificent and terrible. 20 meters tall, skin the color of dried blood, muscles that bulged with impossible strength. A greater daemon of Khorne, the blood god, a thing that existed only to kill and destroy. It had already torn through 2 companies of PDF soldiers. Their weapons had done nothing. Their faith had not saved them. The daemon laughed as it killed, each death feeding its power, making it stronger. Vex made a decision. She had sworn to protect the Imperium, even if it meant making deals with things she did not understand. She turned to Dominus Cray. Open the cell! The tech priest's mechanical voice rose in pitch. Inquisitor! That violates 17 security protocols. If he is hostile, if this was his plan all along, we will have unleashed something worse than the daemon. I know, Vex said quietly. Do it anyway. The locks disengaged, one by one. The adamantium door swung open with a hiss of hydraulics. Saitama stepped out of the cell and looked around the observation room with curiosity. Thanks, he said. Which way to the problem? Vex pointed to the screens showing District 3. A daemon of chaos. A being from the warp. Sustained by violence and hatred. It cannot be killed by normal means. When destroyed in our reality, it simply returns to the warp and reforms. Saitama studied the image of the daemon tearing a tank in half. Looks strong, he said. There was something in his voice, a tiny spark of interest that had not been there before. How do I get there? The transit system is down, Commissar Drek said, appearing in the doorway with his uniform scorched and his face grim. It would take an hour to reach District 3 on foot. Saitama walked to the window of the observation room and looked out at the hive spreading before him. He could see the fires in District 3, 3 kilometers away, across a maze of buildings and streets. "Okay," he said. Then he jumped. The window exploded outward in a shower of armor glass. Saitama shot through the air like a missile, his cape streaming behind him, covering the 3-kilometer distance in less than 5 seconds. He landed in the plaza where the daemon stood, his feet touching. Down on rockcrete, still wet with blood, the daemon turned to look at this new arrival. It saw a small human in yellow clothes, bald and unremarkable. It laughed, a sound like grinding metal and breaking bones. "Another insect," the daemon said, its voice echoing from the warp itself. "Come to die, like all the others. Come to feed the blood god with your skull." Saitama looked up at the towering creature. He noticed the way reality seemed to warp around it, the way the air grew hot with its presence, the way its every movement left tears in space that bled crimson light. He noticed all of this with a detached interest of someone who had seen many strange things. "You're pretty big," Saitama said. The daemon raised its massive fist, a fist that had crushed space marines in their power armor, that had shattered fortress walls and broken the spirit of entire armies. It brought that fist down on Saitama with all the fury of the warp behind it. The impact created a crater 10 meters deep. Dust and debris filled the air. The few surviving PDF soldiers watching from a distance looked away, unable to bear witnessing another death. Then, the dust cleared. Saitama stood in the center of the crater, his hand raised above his head. He had caught the daemon's fist with one hand. His expression had not changed. "Is that it?" he asked. The daemon's eyes, burning with the light of the warp, widened in something that might have been surprise or might have been fear. It pulled back its fist and struck again, and again, each blow falling with the force to level buildings. Saitama caught each one with casual ease, like a man catching thrown balls. "My turn," Saitama said. He threw a punch. Not his strongest punch, not even a serious punch. Just a normal punch, aimed at the daemon's chest. His fist connected, and the greater daemon of Khorne ceased to exist. Not banished to the warp, not sent back to reform. It simply stopped being. The punch went through the daemon's form and continued outward, creating a shockwave that shattered windows for a kilometer in every direction. Where the daemon had stood, there was nothing but empty air and a slowly fading scream that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. In the warp itself, something noticed. The dark gods, ancient and terrible, turned their attention to this impossible event. One of their greater daemons had been truly killed, its essence not returned to them but destroyed utterly. It should not have been possible. It violated the fundamental rules of their existence. Across the sector, psychers screamed and fell unconscious, their minds unable to process the psychic shockwave of a daemon's permanent death. Astropaths clawed at their eyes. Navigators lost their way in the warp and found themselves in places between places that should not exist. On Mordaxus Prime, in the plaza of District 3, Saitama looked around at the destruction and the staring soldiers. He brushed some dust off his gloves. "Anyone know where I can get something to eat?" he asked. Nobody answered. They were too busy falling to their knees and praying, their voices joining in hymns of thanks and terror, unable to comprehend what they had just witnessed. In the observation room 3 kilometers away, Inquisitor Vex watched the scene through the long-range viewers. Her hands were shaking. In her 70 years of service to the Inquisition, she had seen things that would shatter normal minds. She had fought daemons and heretics, had witnessed the death of worlds and the corruption of saints. But this was different. This was something her faith had not prepared her for. Beside her, Dominus Cray's mechanical voice was barely a whisper. "He killed it. Truly killed it. The warp signature is gone. Completely gone. It is as if the daemon never existed at all." "What is he?" Vex asked, not expecting an answer. "What in the Emperor's name is he?" On the screens, Saitama was walking away from the plaza, heading toward what looked like a food vendor's stall. He was looking at the prices with the expression of someone calculating whether he had enough money in his wallet. Watching him, Vex felt her faith crack, just slightly, like ice beginning to thaw. If something this powerful existed outside the Emperor's plan, outside the careful theology that held the Imperium together, what did that mean for everything she believed? The question had no answer, and that terrified her more than any daemon ever could. The message reached Terra 17 days after the daemon's death. It traveled through the warp on specially shielded astropathic relays, each psyker in the chain burning out their minds to pass along the impossible news. A greater daemon of Khorne had been permanently destroyed. Not banished, not dispersed, but erased from existence by a single strike from an unknown entity. When the message arrived at the Imperial Palace, the High Lords of Terra gathered in emergency session. They met in a chamber so old that its walls remembered the Unification Wars, when the Emperor himself had walked among men and forged humanity into a single empire. 12 of the most powerful individuals in the galaxy sat in a circle and argued about what to do with a bald man in a yellow suit. Lord Commander Militant Gareth believed the entity was a weapon sent by the Emperor, a final gift to humanity in its darkest hour. Lord Inquisitor Torvin disagreed, claiming that anything with such power that did not kneel to Imperial authority was a threat that must be eliminated. The debate raged for 3 hours until the Fabricator General of Mars spoke through his Vox transmitter, his mechanical voice cutting through the argument like a knife. Whether blessing or curse, we must know what this entity is. I propose we send both sword and shield. The Grey Knights to test his purity, and the Officio Assassinorum to ensure we have a final solution if needed. The vote was called. The decision was made. Within 6 hours, a strike cruiser left orbit around Titan, carrying the Imperium's finest daemon hunters toward Mordaxis Prime. In the shadows of that same decision, an assassin received orders and began preparations to kill a god. On Mordaxis Prime, Saitama had become a problem he had not asked for and did not want. They called it the Fist of Deliverance, this new religious movement that had sprung up in the 3 weeks since the daemon's death. It started with Sergeant Mara Kellis, who had witnessed Saitama's first punch that destroyed the orc. Wah, she told her squad mates about the miracle she had seen. They told others. The story spread through the PDF ranks, then to the civilian population, growing and changing with each retelling. By the 2nd week, there were shrines. Small ones, at first, hidden in corners and back alleys, decorated with crude drawings of a bald figure in yellow. By the 3rd week, the shrines were open and bold, and people brought offerings of food and prayers written on scraps of paper. Saitama had tried to stop it. He stood in the central plaza of District 7 and told a crowd of 5,000 people that he was not a saint, not blessed, not special. He was just a guy who trained hard. The crowd listened politely, and then began chanting his name with even more fervor, because his humility only proved his holiness. Cardinal Matthias had attempted to redirect the movement, to fold it into proper imperial doctrine, but the believers resisted. They did not want prayers filtered through priests. They wanted to speak directly to their saint, to touch his yellow cape, to hear his words of wisdom. When Saitama told a young girl that she should eat her vegetables and exercise regularly, she took his words as sacred commandment and began a fasting ritual that nearly killed her before her parents intervened. When Saitama mentioned that fighting was boring when you were too strong, philosophers wrote entire treatises about the spiritual meaning of power and purpose. He could not sneeze without someone declaring it a sign. Inquisitor Vex watched this growing cult with increasing alarm. She had ordered surveillance on Saitama, following him through the hive as he went about his daily routine of looking for cheap food and asking random people if they knew anything about dimensional portals. Her agents reported back with files full of the mundane. The entity spent most of his time sitting in his assigned quarters watching entertainment, broadcasts, or wandering through markets comparing prices on vegetables. He showed no interest in power, no desire to lead, no signs of corruption. This, somehow, made Vex more nervous than if he had been actively malicious. An enemy you could understand was an enemy you could fight. But this being seemed to operate on logic that made no sense within the framework of Imperial thinking. The Grey Knights arrived on the 24th day. Their strike cruiser entered orbit without announcement, and their Thunderhawk gunships descended through the toxic atmosphere like falling stars. Brother Captain Alaric led the strike force, 5 of the Imperium's finest warriors, each one a psyker trained since childhood to fight the enemies of mankind, equipped with weapons, blessed by the Emperor himself, and armor inscribed with wards that could turn aside demonic claws. They found Saitama in a small cafe in District 7, eating a bowl of noodles that cost 3 throne gelt. He looked up as 5 armored giants entered through the doorway, their bulk making the cafe suddenly feel very small. The other patrons fled, sensing the weight of purpose that surrounded these warriors. "You are the one they call the Saint of the One Punch," Alaric said, his voice amplified by his helmet's Vox system. "We have come to test your purity." Saitama slurped his noodles. "I'm not a saint," he said, for what felt like the 1,000th time. "I keep telling people that." "Then you will not object to proving it," Alaric replied. He drew his Nemesis Force sword, and psychic lightning crackled along its blade. "If you are pure, you have nothing to fear. If you are corrupted, you will be destroyed. This is the will of the Emperor." Saitama sighed and put down his chopsticks. He had been enjoying those noodles. They led him to the arena, a vast circular space in the heart of the hive where criminals once fought for the entertainment of crowds. Now it stood empty except for the Grey Knights and a handful of observers that Inquisitor Vex had permitted to witness the trial. Cardinal Matthias was there, praying quietly. Commissar Drex stood at attention, his hand near his weapon. Dominus Cray watched through dozens of sensor feeds, recording every detail. Alaric explained the rules. They would test Saitama in combat. If he could withstand their assault without showing signs of chaos corruption, if their blessed weapons found no purchase in demonic flesh, then he would be declared pure. If he fell, or if he revealed himself to be a creature of the warp, they would end him. "Ready?" Alaric asked. Saitama nodded. "Sure, but I don't want to hurt you guys." The Grey Knights attacked as one, moving with the perfect coordination of warriors who had fought together for decades. Their blades sang through the air, each strike guided by psychic power and centuries of training. Any normal opponent would have been cut apart in the first second. Saitama dodged. He moved like water, like wind, his body somehow always in the space between their blades. The Grey Knights pressed harder, their movements becoming a blur of silver armor and blue lightning. They were among the finest warriors humanity had ever produced, each one capable of killing daemons that would break lesser men with a glance. Saitama yawned. Not out of disrespect, but because he was genuinely bored. He had seen this pattern of attack before, in 100 different forms. Fast, coordinated, precise, but ultimately predictable. Brother Alaric saw the yawn and felt something he had not experienced in 30 years of service. Doubt. This being was not even trying. The Grey Knights regrouped and changed tactics. They formed a circle around Saitama and struck simultaneously from all sides, their psychic powers combining into a cage of force that would crush anything within. The cage closed. Saitama raised one hand and caught all 5 blades at once, his fingers gripping the blessed weapons that could cut through daemon flesh. The psychic energy crackling along the blades touched his skin and dissipated harmlessly, like water running off stone. "My turn?" Saitama asked. He did not wait for an answer. He moved, not at full speed, because full speed would have been dangerous to his opponents, but fast enough to make his point. His fist touched Brother Alaric's chest plate with what seemed like gentle pressure. The Grey Knight flew backward, his armor crumpling, and crashed into the arena wall 50 meters away, creating a crater in the reinforced rockcrete. Saitama turned to the next Grey Knight and tapped him on the shoulder. The warrior spun through the air like a thrown ball and landed in a heap. Tap, tap, tap. Within 5 seconds, all 5 Grey Knights were down, their armor dented, their pride shattered, but their lives intact. Saitama had pulled every punch, using just enough force to win without causing permanent harm. In the observation area, Cardinal Matthias fell to his knees in prayer. Commissar Drex stood frozen, unable to process what he had just witnessed. The Grey Knights were legends, warriors who stood between humanity and the horrors of the warp. To see them defeated so easily was to see the foundation of the Imperium crack. Alaric pulled himself from the wall, his armor system sparking and failing. He removed his helmet with shaking hands and looked at Saitama with eyes that had seen 10,000 battles. "What are you?" he asked. "I told you," Saitama replied. "I'm just a guy who's a hero for fun. Or a hobby. I guess technically it's a hobby now since I'm not getting paid." Before Alaric could respond, new alarms shrieked through the hive. These were different from the warning sirens that had announced the orc attack or the daemon summoning. These were the void alarms, the ones that meant something was coming from space, something that threatened the entire world. In the orbital command center, servitors chanted readings in binary while officers shouted orders over the Vox. The sensor arrays had detected a massive biosignature entering the system, moving at speeds that should have been impossible for something alive. Inquisitor Vex stood before the main display and felt ice form in her stomach. She had seen these patterns before, in classified briefings and nightmare scenarios that kept Lord Commanders awake at night. Tyranids, she said, and the word fell into the command center like a stone into still water. The Great Devourer had found Mordaxus Prime. The splinter fleet emerged from the darkness between stars, like a swarm of locusts given form and hunger. There were hundreds of bioships, each one a living vessel the size of a cruiser, grown rather than built, powered by organs that pulsed with stolen life force. Within those ships traveled millions of Tyranid organisms, all connected to a single vast intelligence, all driven by one purpose: to consume. The hive mind had noticed the psychic disturbance caused by the daemons, permanent death. It had felt the ripples in the warp and been drawn to investigate. Now it looked upon Mordaxus Prime with hunger that transcended mere feeding. This world had 5 billion human souls. Their biomass would feed the swarm. Their genetic material would be absorbed and improved. Nothing would remain but bare rock. The PDF mobilized what remained of their forces. Every able soldier was given a weapon and sent to defensive positions. The small Navy contingent in orbit prepared for a battle they knew they could not win. On the surface, civilians were herded into the deepest shelters, while PDF troopers set up firing lines and prayed to the Emperor for deliverance. In the arena, Saitama listened to Commissar Drex explain the situation. Giant alien creatures from space that ate entire worlds, billions of them, all working together with one mind. Weapons that could melt through tank armor, claws that could tear through steel. An unstoppable tide that had devoured 1,000 worlds and would devour 1,000 more. So, Saitama said, they're like really big bugs? Drex's face twitched. That is one way to describe the greatest threat to human survival in the galaxy, yes. Saitama looked up at the sky, where the first bioships were beginning their descent through the atmosphere. They looked like falling stars, if stars were made of chitin and hatred and hunger. He could feel the weight of billions of lives depending on what happened next. He could see the fear in the eyes of the soldiers around him. He thought about grocery stores and sales and the simple pleasure of a hot meal. He thought about his apartment back in Z-City with its scratched walls and broken air conditioner. He wanted to go home. But first, he had to deal with the bugs. I'll be right back, Saitama said. He crouched slightly, his muscles tensing, and then launched himself into the sky. The force of his jump created a crater in the arena floor and shattered windows for 200 meters. He rose through the toxic atmosphere of Mordaxus Prime like a missile, faster than sound, faster than sight, leaving a trail of displaced air that formed a column of clear space through the pollution. Within seconds, he breached the atmosphere and entered the void. Space was cold and empty and silent, but Saitama had been in space before. He could hold his breath for a very long time. He looked around at the Tyranid fleet surrounding the planet and did some quick math. Hundreds of ships, maybe 1,000. He would need to hit each one hard enough to destroy it, but not so hard that the debris would fall on the cities below. This would take a few minutes. He selected the largest bioship, the one at the center of the formation, and swam through the void toward it. The ship noticed him, and the hive mind focused its attention on this single organism approaching through space without armor or vehicle. It calculated threat levels and dismissed them. One human could not harm a vessel designed to survive the void. Saitama reached the ship's hull and punched it. The bioship was 3 kilometers long, grown over decades from genetic material harvested from 100 different species. Its hull was designed to withstand meteor impacts and naval weaponry. It had organic shields and regenerative tissues that could repair damage faster than most weapons could inflict it. Saitama's fist went through it like paper. The punch continued through the ship's interior, through the cathedral-sized chambers where Tyranid organisms gestated in amniotic pods, through the neural clusters where synapses fired with the collective thoughts of the hive mind, through the massive organs that served as engines and weapons and spawning pools. It emerged from the other side of the ship and continued into space, and behind it, the bioship began to die. Not slowly, not with the usual Tyranid resilience, but instantly. The ship's hull split apart, and its contents spilled into the void. Millions of organisms died in seconds as pressure and cold and vacuum did their work. The hive mind felt this death like a severed limb and recoiled. One of its ships, gone. Impossible. It directed the rest of the fleet to focus on this threat, to destroy this single organism that somehow survived in the void. Every bioship in the fleet turned toward Saitama and opened fire. Bioplasma arced through space, each blast hot enough to melt steel. Acid pods launched in volleys that could saturate an entire battlefield. Living projectiles the size of tanks shot toward him, their bodies designed to impact and then tear apart whatever they hit. Saitama dodged most of it and ignored the rest. The attacks that hit him bounced off or dissolved against his skin without leaving a mark. He jumped from ship to ship, each jump carrying him hundreds of kilometers, each landing destroying whatever vessel he touched. Punch! A bioship the size of a battlecruiser broke apart, its spine shattered. Punch! A carrier vessel disgorged its cargo of Tyranid warriors into space, where they died gasping in the void. Punch! 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 The hive mind, ancient and vast, felt something it had not felt in millions of years of evolution and consumption. It felt fear. This single organism was destroying its fleet faster than it could adapt, faster than it could evolve countermeasures. Every attack failed. Every tactic proved useless. The being in yellow simply continued punching, and with each punch, another ship died. In 7 minutes, Saitama had destroyed the entire splinter fleet. 1,000 bioships reduced to debris that would burn up in Mordaxus Prime's atmosphere or drift forever in the void. The hive mind's presence in the system collapsed, its connection to this fleet severed completely. Somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, the greater hive mind felt this loss and marked it. This system was dangerous. This prey fought back with impossible force. The Tyranid would return, but not soon. Not until the hive mind had processed what had happened and evolved something that might have a chance of survival. For now, Mordaxus Prime was safe. Saitama floated in the debris field and realized he was running out of breath. He pointed himself toward the planet and pushed off from a piece of ship hull, diving back toward the atmosphere. He hit the upper atmosphere at terminal velocity, his body glowing from friction heat, and descended like a falling star toward the hive below. He landed in the same arena where he had fought the Grey Knights, his feet touching down on rockcrete with barely a sound. Around him, the observers stood in stunned silence. They had watched the battle through long-range viewers, had seen the impossible dance of death as a single man destroyed an entire Tyranid fleet with his bare hands. Inquisitor Vex approached slowly, her face pale. She had authorized an assassin to kill this being. That assassin was somewhere in the hive right now, preparing to strike. Looking at Saitama, looking at the absolutely ordinary expression on his face as he brushed space dust off his cape, Vex made a decision. She activated her Vox and spoke a single code phrase. Mission abort. Return to base. Somewhere in the darkness, an assassin received the message and melted back into shadows, their target untouched. Vex would file a report explaining that assassination was not feasible. What she would not write in that report was the truth she had just accepted, that some things were beyond the Imperium's ability to control or kill, and that sometimes the wise choice was simply to step aside. Brother Captain Alaric limped forward, his armor still smoking from Saitama's casual strike. He knelt before the man in yellow, his head bowed. "Forgive my doubt," he said. "You are pure. Purer than anything I have encountered in 3 decades of service. Whatever you are, wherever you come from, you are not touched by chaos." Saitama scratched his head. "Thanks, I guess. So, about those noodles I was eating. Do you think they're still warm?" Dominus Cray made the discovery on the 32nd day after Saitama's arrival. The tech priest had spent weeks analyzing the dimensional breach through which the stranger had fallen, studying the fading traces of warp energy that still lingered in the upper atmosphere. His cogitators processed terabytes of data, searching for patterns in the chaos, trying to understand how a portal from another reality could have formed. The answer, when it finally came, was both simple and terrifying. Saitama's punch into the warp, his passage through the screaming void between dimensions, had left a wound in reality itself. The fabric that separated universes had been torn, and though the tear was healing, it was healing slowly. Kray's calculations showed that the wound would close completely in approximately 48 hours. After that, returning Saitama to his home dimension would require technology that did not exist, power that the Imperium could not provide, and understanding of dimensional mechanics that would take centuries to develop. The tech priest brought his findings to Inquisitor Vex in her office, overlooking the rebuilt sections of District 3. She listened to his report in silence, her fingers drumming against her desk, her mind racing through implications and consequences. "Can you use this wound to send him back?" she asked. Kray's mechadendrites writhed with uncertainty. "Theoretically, yes. The wound provides a weak point between realities. With sufficient power and precise calculations, we could force it open wide enough for a human-sized object to pass through. However, the risks are substantial. If we miscalculate, we could tear the wound wider, creating a permanent breach that would allow things from the warp to flood into our reality unchecked." Vex stood and walked to the window. Below, she could see crowds gathering around one of the larger Fist of Deliverance shrines. The cult had grown beyond anyone's ability to control. Yesterday, 3 minor noble families had declared their allegiance to the movement, bringing with them resources and influence that made the whole thing even more dangerous. If Saitama stayed much longer, the theological damage might become irreparable. If he left through a botched portal attempt, they might doom the entire sector. "How long do you need to prepare?" she asked. 12 hours to gather the necessary equipment and perform the calculations. Another 12 to charge the power cells and establish the dimensional coordinates. "We would be working against time, Inquisitor. The margin for error is extremely small." Vex turned from the window and looked at the tech priest. She had spent her entire life making impossible decisions, weighing souls against security, sacrificing the few to save the many. This should have been just another calculation. But when she thought about Saitama, about his simple desire to go home and buy groceries, about the way he had saved billions of lives without asking for anything in return, the calculation felt different. "Do it," she said. "Prepare everything. I will inform him." She found Saitama in his quarters, a small room in the Hive's guest section that had been hastily prepared for him. He sat on the bed watching a news broadcast about the Tyranid fleet's destruction. The newscaster was calling it the miracle of Mordaxis, attributing the victory to the Emperor's divine intervention. Saitama was mentioned as a holy instrument, a living saint sent to deliver the faithful. He looked up as Vex entered, his expression flat. "They got the story wrong," he said, pointing at the screen. "I wasn't sent by anyone. I just showed up by accident." Vex nodded. She had stopped trying to correct the narrative. The Imperium needed its myths more than it needed truth. "We have found a way to send you home," she said. "But it must be done within the next day, or the opportunity will be lost forever." For the first time since she had met him, Vex saw something like relief cross Saitama's face. It was brief, quickly replaced by his usual expression of mild boredom. But it had been there. He missed his home. He missed his simple life. "When do we start?" he asked. "Tonight," Vex replied. "But there is something you should know. The people of this world, perhaps of this entire sector, believe you are a saint. They believe the Emperor sent you to save them. If you leave, that belief will not disappear. They will create legends about you, stories that will spread across the Imperium and change how people think about faith and power." Saitama shrugged. "People believe what they want to believe. I can't control that." "No," Vex said quietly. "You cannot. But I wanted you to understand the mark you are leaving on this galaxy. Long after you are gone, the Fist of Deliverance will remember. They will tell their children about the saint who asked for nothing and gave everything. They will pass down your words as sacred text, even though you were just making casual conversation." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "Does that bother you? Knowing that your existence here has changed something fundamental about how these people see the universe?" Saitama thought about this for a moment. "Back home, people write fan theories about me too. They make up stories about where my power comes from, about hidden meanings in things I say. It used to annoy me, but I realized something. People need stories. They need heroes. If believing in me helps them get through the day, I guess that is okay." He stood up and looked at Vex directly. But I am not a god. I am not a saint. I am just strong. And being strong is not the same as being special. The preparations took exactly as long as Dominus Cray had predicted. Tech priests swarmed through a sealed section of the hive's industrial district, setting up equipment that hummed with barely contained power. Massive capacitors charged slowly, drawing energy from the hive's main reactor until the lights dimmed throughout several districts. The air grew heavy with ozone and the metallic taste of reality being stressed. Cardinal Matthias arrived uninvited, his red robes trailing behind him as he inspected the portal apparatus. "You are sending him away," he said, and it was not a question. "The Emperor brought him here for a purpose. That purpose is not yet complete." Cray's vocalizer emitted a sound of annoyance. "The entity wishes to return home. We are merely facilitating his desire." "Desire?" The Cardinal's voice rose. "What does desire matter when weighed against the needs of the Imperium? He could lead crusades. He could cleanse entire sectors of Xeno's taint. He could be the Emperor's sword made flesh, the instrument of our salvation." Inquisitor Vex stepped between them, her hand resting on her plasma pistol. "He is not a weapon, Cardinal. He is not a tool. He is a person who wants to go home, and we will help him do so." Matthias looked at her with something like pity. "You have lost your faith, Inquisitor. You have seen true power, and it has blinded you to the Emperor's plan." "Perhaps," Vex said. "Or perhaps I have learned that the Emperor's plan is more complex than any of us can understand, and that sometimes the faithful thing to do is to let go." Word of Saitama's departure spread through the hive, despite all attempts at secrecy. By the time evening fell and the portal apparatus reached full charge, thousands of people had gathered outside the industrial complex. They pressed against the security barriers, waving banners marked with crude images of a bald man in yellow, chanting prayers that mixed imperial litany with new words that had no place in sanctioned doctrine. The PDF had deployed 3 companies to maintain order, but the soldiers themselves were conflicted. Many of them had witnessed Saitama's miracles firsthand. They had seen him destroy the Orc, kill the Daemon, shatter the Tyrannid fleet. How could they raise weapons against people who only wanted to see their saint one last time? Commissar Drex stood at the security line and watched the crowd with tired eyes. In his 40 years of service, he had ordered men to charge certain death, had executed cowards and traitors, had made decisions that haunted his dreams. But this was different. These were not enemies. They were believers, and their faith was genuine, even if it was misplaced. He saw families with children, elderly men and women who had survived the Orc invasion, wounded soldiers still bearing the scars of battle. They had all come to say goodbye to the being who had saved them. "Let them in," he said, quietly. The officer beside him looked shocked. "Sir, we have orders to maintain security. No civilians beyond the barrier." "I said, let them in," Drex repeated, louder this time. "These people have earned the right to witness this. They fought for this hive. They bled for it. If they want to see their saint depart, we will not stop them." The barriers opened. The crowd flowed in like water, filling the vast space around the portal apparatus with humanity. They did not riot or push. They simply stood and waited, their eyes fixed on the platform where Saitama would make his departure. In the control room overlooking the platform, Dominus Cray made final adjustments to the dimensional coordinates. His mechadendrites danced across controls, while servitors chanted binary prayers. The portal apparatus began to glow, energy coils spinning faster and faster, building toward the critical threshold where reality would tear and allow passage between universes. 5 minutes, Cray announced through the Vox system. His voice echoed across the crowd, and a hush fell over them like a blanket. Saitama emerged from a side entrance, still wearing his yellow suit and red gloves, his white cape settling around his shoulders. He walked toward the platform with the same casual gait he had maintained since arriving, seemingly unaware of the weight of every eye upon him. Inquisitor Vex walked beside him, and she could feel the tension in the air like a physical thing. One word from Saitama could start a revolution. One gesture could reshape Imperial faith for generations. They reached the platform, and Saitama turned to face the crowd. Thousands of people looked back at him, their faces reflecting every emotion from joy to grief to desperate hope. He cleared his throat awkwardly. "So, thanks for trying to help me get home," he said, his voice amplified by voxcasters, carried across the silent crowd. I know some of you think I am something special, but I am really not. I just trained hard and got strong. Anyone could do it if they stick with it. In the crowd, a young PDF soldier named Jorik listened to these words with the intensity of someone receiving divine revelation. He pulled out a piece of paper and began writing frantically. Push-ups, sit-ups, squats, running, the holy regimen, the path to strength. Around him, others were doing the same, recording the saint's final teaching, not realizing they were writing down a workout routine that Saitama had mentioned dozens of times before with no particular emphasis. I guess what I am trying to say, Saitama continued, is that being strong is not about power. It is about getting back up when things knock you down. It is about doing what needs to be done even when you do not feel like doing it. That is all. He paused, looking uncomfortable with the attention. And if you are facing something that seems impossible, do not overthink it. Just punch it really hard and see what happens. In the front of the crowd, Sergeant Mara Kellis felt tears streaming down her face. She had been prepared to die in that corridor when the orcs attacked. She had accepted death, and then this being had fallen from the sky and given her a second chance at life. She wanted to thank him, to tell him what his presence had meant, but her voice would not work. Beside her, other soldiers were crying too. Hardened warriors brought to tears by the simple goodbye of a man in a yellow suit. Brother Captain Alaric stood with his gray knights, his helmet removed, his face showing an expression of something close to peace. He had spent his entire life fighting chaos, facing horrors that would break normal minds. He had believed that purity required constant vigilance, endless sacrifice, absolute dedication to duty. But Saitama had shown him something different. True purity was not about fighting darkness. It was about being so filled with light that darkness had nowhere to take hold. It was simplicity and honesty and the genuine desire to help without asking for reward. Alaric would carry this lesson back to Titan, would share it with his brothers, and it would change how the Grey Knights understood their purpose in subtle but important ways. Behind the platform, Cardinal Matthias watched with his jaw clenched. He had wanted to speak, to deliver a sermon about the Emperor's mysterious ways, but Inquisitor Vex had forbidden it. This moment belonged to Saitama, not to the ecclesiarchy. The Cardinal would spend the rest of his life wrestling with what he had witnessed, trying to fit it into his understanding of Imperial theology, and mostly failing. The portal apparatus reached critical charge. Dominus Cray's voice came through the vox, tense with concentration. Beginning dimensional breach in 30 seconds. All personnel maintained safe distance from the platform. The air above the platform began to shimmer and twist. Colors that should not exist bled into reality, and for a moment, the crowd could see through the forming portal into another world. They saw a city of glass and steel, cleaner and brighter than anything they had known. They saw a sky without pollution, a sun that did not burn toxic orange but shone with clear yellow light. They saw, just for a moment, what Saitama's home looked like, and the contrast, with the grim darkness of their own existence, was almost painful. The portal stabilized, a perfect circle hovering in the air, showing the skyline of Z-City like a window into another life. Saitama looked at it and felt homesickness hit him like a physical force. His apartment was through that portal. His bed, his TV, his favorite convenience store that always had sales on Wednesdays. Normal life, simple life. He turned to Inquisitor Vex one last time. "Thanks for not trying to kill me," he said. "I know you thought about it." Vex allowed herself a small smile. "I am glad I did not. Goodbye, Saitama. May you find peace in your home that we cannot find in ours. May you find strength in his name," Brother Captain Alaric said. And though he meant the Emperor, looking at his face, Vex suspected he was no longer entirely sure which he was referring to. Saitama gave the crowd one final wave, awkward and uncertain, the gesture of someone who had never been comfortable with attention. Then he turned and stepped through the portal. The crossing took less than a second. One moment he was on the platform in the industrial district of Mordaxis Prime, surrounded by believers and warriors and the weight of an entire galaxy's expectations. The next moment he was standing on a familiar street in Z-City, feeling real sunlight on his bald head, smelling clean air that did not taste of promethium and decay. Behind him, the portal collapsed with a sound like a sigh, and he was home. On Mordaxus Prime, the crowd stood in silence for a long moment after the portal closed. Then someone began to sing, a hymn of thanks and farewell. Others joined in, their voices rising in harmony, and the song spread through the industrial district and into the hive beyond. Within an hour, all of Mordaxus Prime was singing. Within a day, the song had spread to other worlds in the sector. Within a month, it had become part of unofficial Imperial hymnals across a dozen systems. The Church of the Fist of Deliverance, as it would eventually be called, grew slowly but steadily in the years that followed. The Inquisition monitored it carefully, ready to purge it if it showed signs of true heresy, but the cult remained strangely pure. Its followers did not worship Saitama as a god. They held him as an example of what simple dedication and honest effort could achieve. They practiced his holy regimen, those 100 repetitions and the daily run, and found that while it did not make them able to destroy daemons with one punch, it did make them healthier and more disciplined. PDF regiments that adopted the training showed improved performance. Worker efficiency in hive factories increased. It was a tiny change in a vast galaxy, but it was a change nonetheless. Inquisitor Vex filed her final report 3 weeks after Saitama's departure. She wrote about the theological implications, the potential for schism, the need for careful monitoring. But in a sealed addendum that only the highest levels of the Inquisition would ever read, she wrote something else. She wrote about faith and doubt, about how absolute certainty could be a weakness rather than strength. She wrote about a being of impossible power who wanted nothing more than to go home and eat cheap noodles. She wrote about how sometimes the most profound wisdom came from the simplest sources. She ended her report with a question that had no answer, a question that would haunt her for the rest of her life. If there existed beings of such power beyond the Emperor's realm, beings who were neither corrupted nor aligned with Imperial goals, what did that mean for everything the Imperium believed about its place in the universe? In his quarters that night, Commissar Drek sat at his desk and wrote a letter to his daughter on a distant agri-world. He told her about the miracle he had witnessed, about the saint who fell from the sky and asked only for directions to a grocery store. He told her about simple strength and honest purpose. He told her that sometimes the Emperor worked in ways that even the most faithful could not understand, and that this was okay. Understanding was less important than doing what was right. He sealed the letter and marked it for the next astropathic relay, knowing it would take months to reach her, hoping she would find some meaning in his words. In Z-City, Saitama sat in his small apartment with a bowl of instant noodles and watched the evening news. Another monster attack had been defeated by the Hero Association. No one had needed his help. He had missed the entire thing while he was away. On the wall beside his television hung a small object he had brought back with him, something he had found in his quarters on Mordaxus Prime, left there by someone who wanted him to have a reminder. It was a medallion bearing the Imperial Aquila, the double-headed eagle that symbolized humanity's dominion over the stars. He looked at it sometimes and thought about the gray universe he had visited, about the people who lived in darkness and called it light, about soldiers who fought impossible wars with unshakable faith. He thought about Inquisitor Vex and her questions that had no answers. He thought about Brother Captain Alaric and the weight of duty he carried. He thought about the crowds who had gathered to say goodbye, and about how their hope had been so desperate and so real. His communicator buzzed. Genos, his cyborg disciple, was calling about a new training regimen he wanted to try. Saitama answered, and listened to the enthusiastic young hero talk about techniques and strategies, about ways to become stronger. He gave advice without really thinking about it, simple suggestions that Genos would analyze for hours, searching for hidden wisdom. Outside his window, the city hummed with normal life. Heroes fought monsters, people went to work, children played in parks. Everything was ordinary and simple and exactly the way it should be. But sometimes, when the wind blew just right, and the light hit the Imperial Aquila at a certain angle, Saitama would look at it and wonder if somewhere in the grim darkness of that other universe, Inquisitor Vex was looking at the stars and thinking about him. He wondered if the wound in reality had truly healed, or if, somewhere in the space between dimensions, a thin spot remained where universes touched. He wondered if he would ever go back, not because he wanted to, but because the barriers between worlds were thinner than anyone knew, and what had happened once could happen again. Then he would shrug and go back to his noodles, because wondering about multiversal barriers was the kind of thing that led to headaches, and he had fought enough strange things for one lifetime. The medallion caught the light and gleamed, the double-headed eagle watching over a hero who wanted nothing more than a good sale at the supermarket and maybe, just maybe, an opponent who could give him a real fight.